She was sitting in seat 3A, quietly typing code that was vital to national security. She wasn't loud, she wasn't drinking, she was working. But to flight attendant Brenda Vance, Dr. Aris Thorne didn't look like a scientist. She looked like a problem. What started as a petty power trip over a carry-on bag spiraled into an accusation of unruly behavior that grounded a commercial flight and brought federal agents to the gate. The crew thought they were kicking off a nobody. They didn't know she was carrying a Level 5 NASA clearance badge in her pocket. You're about to witness a moment where bias meets a brick wall of federal authority. This is the story of Flight 299 and the karma that hit harder than a jet engine. The fluorescent hum of Washington Dulles International Airport usually stressed people out. But for Dr. Aris Thorne, it was white noise. Her stress was specific, mathematical, and currently flashing on the screen of her government-issued laptop. Aris was 34, with sharp eyes behind thick-rimmed glasses and hair pulled back in a practical, no-nonsense bun. She was wearing a nondescript grey hoodie and sweatpants, her standard travel uniform for long hauls. She wasn't dressing to impress. She was dressing to survive the 4-hour flight to Houston. Aris was the lead systems architect for the Project Artemis Orbital Variance team. In layman's terms, she wrote the math that ensured the next generation of lunar satellites didn't crash into space debris. Today, she was flying to the Johnson Space Center for a Code Red meeting. A variance in the trajectory data had been spotted 3 hours ago. If she didn't fix the code by the time she landed, $1 billion launch window would close. She approached Gate C-14, her mind racing through Python scripts and orbital mechanics. She barely noticed the gate agent scanning her boarding pass. Zone 1, priority boarding. Have a safe flight, Miss Thorne. Thanks, Aris mumbled, already looking at her phone. She walked down the jet bridge, the air getting stuffy and smelling of recycled coffee. She stepped onto Flight 299. It was a packed Friday evening flight. Aris found her seat, 3A, in the first-class cabin. The company didn't usually spring for first, but the urgency of the meeting required her to be the first one off the plane. She slid into the window seat and immediately pulled out her laptop. She didn't order a drink. She didn't look at the menu. She opened her terminal and began typing furiously, lines of green code cascading down the black screen. That was when the shadow fell over her. "Ma'am?" The voice was nasally and dripping with forced politeness. Aris finished a line of code before looking up. Standing over her was Brenda Vance, the lead flight attendant. Brenda was in her late 40s, wearing a uniform that was perfectly pressed and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had the look of someone who treated the aircraft cabin as her personal kingdom. "Yes?" Aris said, her fingers hovering over the keys. "I need you to stow your bag," Brenda said, gesturing to Aris's leather backpack, which was tucked securely under the seat in front of her. Aris looked down. "It's under the seat. That's permitted." "Not in the bulkhead, it isn't," Brenda said, her voice rising just slightly, enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. "Row 3 is a bulkhead row. Everything must go up." Aris paused. She looked at the wall in front of her. "Brenda, right?" "My name is Aris. Row 3 isn't a bulkhead on this model of the Boeing 737-800. The bulkhead is in front of row 1. There is a seat in front of me. Therefore, there is underseat storage." It was a factual statement, a simple correction. But to Brenda Vance, it was an act of war. Brenda's jaw tightened. She blinked, processing the fact that this passenger in a hoodie was correcting her on the aircraft's layout. "I don't need a lesson on my aircraft, ma'am. I need you to comply. The overhead bins are filling up. Put the bag up. Now." Aris sighed. Every second she spent arguing was a second the simulation wasn't running. "Look, I have sensitive equipment in this bag. I need it near me. It fits. It's not blocking the egress. Please just let me work." "Sensitive equipment," Brenda repeated, her tone shifting from annoyed to suspicious. She looked at the screen full of scrolling code, then back at Oris's hoodie. "What exactly do you have in there?" "Work," Eris said shortly. "Please, I'm on a deadline." Brenda leaned in, invading Oris's personal space. "If you do not stow the bag, I will have to tag it and check it to the cargo hold. We are running out of space." Checking the bag was not an option. That bag contained 2 encrypted hard drives and a physical security key for the NASA servers. If that bag left her sight, she would be in violation of federal protocol. "You aren't checking this bag," Oris said, her voice dropping an octave. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. "I will put it up in the bin if it makes you happy. But it stays in the cabin." Eris stood up, unplugged her laptop, and hefted the heavy leather bag into the overhead bin directly above her. She slammed the bin shut, perhaps a little harder than necessary, sat back down, and immediately resumed typing. Brenda stood there for a moment, waiting for something. An apology? Submission? When she didn't get it, she let out a sharp huff and walked toward the cockpit. Across the aisle, a man in a suit, Mr. Henderson, according to his tag, leaned over. "Don't worry about her," he whispered. "She yelled at me for having my knees too far out. She's on a tear today." Iris gave a tight smile. "I just need to finish this." She thought it was over. She thought she had complied. She was wrong. 10 minutes passed. The plane was fully boarded. The fasten seatbelt sign pinged on. Iris was deep in the weeds of a trajectory calculation, her noise-cancelling headphones on, blocking out the world. She didn't hear Brenda approaching. She didn't hear the first time Brenda spoke. Suddenly, a hand waved aggressively in front of her screen. Iris jumped, pulling her headphones down around her neck. "Excuse me," Iris said, startled. Brenda was back, and this time she had backup. Another flight attendant, a younger woman named Kelly who looked terrified, stood behind her. "I asked you a question, ma'am," Brenda snapped. "I asked you to power down your device. We are pushing back." Iris looked out the window. The jet bridge was still attached. The door was still open. "We aren't pushing back yet, Brenda. The door is open. I'll save and power down the second the door closes. I really need these minutes." "You are being non-compliant," Brenda stated loudly. The first-class cabin went silent. "I asked you to turn it off. That is a direct instruction from a crew member. Do I need to get the captain?" Iris rubbed her temples. The logic was failing. The FAA regulations state that electronic devices must be in airplane mode or powered down once the cabin door is closed. It is not closed. Why are you targeting me?" "Targeting you?" Brenda laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "I am ensuring the safety of this flight. You have been hostile since you boarded. You argued about the bag. Now you're arguing about the electronics. And frankly, your behavior is making the crew uncomfortable." "My behavior?" Iris turned fully in her seat. "I am sitting here typing. I am doing my job. You are the one escalating this." "That's it," Brenda said. She turned on her heel and marched into the cockpit. Iris looked around. Mr. Henderson gave her a sympathetic cringe. But 2 rows back, a woman whispered loudly to her husband, "She should just listen. Why do they always have to cause a scene?" Iris felt the heat rise in her cheeks. They. She knew exactly what that meant. She took a deep breath. "Focus on the mission, Iris. Save the code. Close the laptop." She hit Ctrl+S. The progress bar crawled. 98%. 99%. The cockpit door opened. Captain Richard Sterling stepped out. He was a tall man with silver hair and the confident swagger of a pilot who believed he was God's gift to aviation. He adjusted his tie and loomed over seat 3A. Brenda stood behind him, arms crossed, looking triumphant. "Ma'am," Captain Sterling said, his voice booming. "My flight lead tells me we have a problem here." Iris closed her laptop. "There is no problem, Captain. I was just finishing some work before the door closed. It's off now." Sterling looked at the laptop, then at Iris, then at Brenda. "She says you've been argumentative, that you refused to stow your bag and refused to follow crew instructions regarding electronic devices." "That is a gross exaggeration," Iris said, keeping her voice calm. "I corrected her on the bulkhead configuration, then I stowed my bag, I explained the FAA regulation on devices, and then I turned it off. I am sitting here, seatbelt on, device off. We are good to go." Sterling didn't like her tone. He didn't like that she wasn't cowering. He leaned in close. "Listen here. On this plane, my crew is the authority. If you give them attitude, you are giving me attitude. Brenda says she doesn't feel safe with you on board." "Safe?" Iris almost laughed. "I'm an engineer. I'm 5'4". How am I a threat?" "Your aggression is a threat," Brenda interjected. "You were typing codes that looked suspicious, and you were combative when asked to move your bag." "Suspicious codes?" Iris stared at her. "It's Python. It's a programming language." "It didn't look like work to me," Brenda sniffed. Captain Sterling made a decision. It was the wrong one, but his ego wouldn't let him back down now. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to step off the aircraft." The cabin gasped. "Excuse me?" Iris said, her blood running cold. "I have to be in Houston tonight. It is critical." "Not on my plane," Sterling said. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for unruly passengers. You are disrupting the flight operation. Grab your things. Let's go." "Captain, you are making a mistake," Iris said, her voice hardening. "A very expensive, very public mistake." "Is that a threat?" Sterling's eyes narrowed. "Did you just threaten me?" "It's a warning," Iris said. "That's it," Sterling shouted. "Brenda, call the LEOs, law enforcement officers. I want her removed. Now." The next 15 minutes were a blur of humiliation. The air conditioning on the plane seemed to stop. The air grew heavy. Every eye in the cabin was fixed on Iris. 2 airport police officers, Officers Miller and Kowalski, boarded the plane. They looked tired. "Where's the problem?" Officer Miller asked. "Seat 3A, Brenda pointed, acting like she was identifying a violent criminal. "She refused to comply with the captain's orders. She threatened the captain. We want her off." Officer Miller looked at Iris, who was sitting with her hands in her lap, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Ma'am," Miller said, "you need to come with us." "I haven't done anything," Iris said, but she unbuckled her seatbelt. She knew the law. Once the pilot orders you off, you get off, or you go to jail. The legal battle happens on the ground. "I want it noted that I am complying under duress." "Just grab your bag, ma'am," Kowalski said, his hand resting near his belt. Iris stood up. She reached into the overhead bin, the bin Brenda had forced her to use, and pulled down her heavy leather bag. She slung it over one shoulder. She grabbed her laptop case. As she walked down the aisle, the whispers started. "Probably on drugs," someone muttered. "Why couldn't she just listen? Terrorist risk, maybe?" Iris looked straight ahead. She locked eyes with Brenda as she passed. Brenda was smiling, a smug, satisfied smirk. "Have a nice day," Brenda said. "Sweet as poison." Iris stopped. The police officers bumped into her from behind. She turned to Brenda. "Brenda Vance," Iris said, memorizing the name on the badge. "And Captain Richard Sterling. Remember this moment." "Keep moving," Captain Sterling barked from the cockpit door. "Get her off my jetway." Iris stepped off the plane. The jet bridge air felt colder now. The door of the Boeing 737 was slammed shut behind her, sealing her fate, and theirs. "We need to see some ID," Officer Miller said, as they walked her up the ramp to the terminal. "And we're going to need to search that bag. The crew said you had suspicious equipment." "I wouldn't open that bag if I were you," Aris said calmly. They were entering the main concourse now. People were staring at the woman being escorted by 2 cops. "Ma'am, don't make this harder," Miller warned. "You're already looking at a interference with flight crew charge. That's a felony." "I'm not worried about the charge," Aris said. She stopped walking. They were in front of the gate C14 desk. The gate agents looked horrified. "I need to make a phone call," Aris said. "You can make a call from the holding room," Kowalski said, reaching for her arm. Aris pulled back sharply. "Do not touch me. I am a federal contractor with Level 5 clearance on a mission of vital national security. If you arrest me, you are impeding a federal operation. Now I am going to take my ID out of my pocket. Slowly." The officers hesitated. The way she spoke didn't sound like a drunk tourist or an unruly passenger. It sounded like a commander. Aris reached into her hoodie pocket. She didn't pull out a driver's license. She pulled out a hard-shell lanyard holder. She flipped it open. It wasn't just a NASA badge. It was a red-bordered DoD, NASA Interagency Clearance Badge. Below her photo, in bold red letters, it read, "Access, Critical Infrastructure. Priority, Top." "Officer," Aris said, holding the badge up to Miller's face. "My name is Dr. Oris Thorne. I report directly to Director Nelson and General Halloway of the Space Force. That laptop contains the guidance codes for the Artemis satellite network. You have grounded me, which means you have grounded them." She pointed a finger at the ceiling. Miller squinted at the badge. His eyes widened. He recognized the Department of Defense hologram. "Oh," Miller whispered. "Yeah." "Oh," Aris said. "Now, I need the airport manager. I need the FBI liaison. And I need you to tell that plane not to move an inch. The plane is pushing back, ma'am," the gate agent squeaked from behind the desk. "It's already disconnected." Aris turned to the window. Flight 299 was slowly reversing onto the tarmac. "Bring it back," Aris said. We can't just recall a plane," the agent stammered. Aris pulled out her phone. She dialed a number she had only used twice in her life. "Who are you calling?" Miller asked, suddenly very nervous. "The Pentagon," Aris said. "Let's see if they can recall a plane." The phone rang twice before a crisp, no-nonsense voice answered. "Pentagon Command Center, Lieutenant Daniels." "Lieutenant, this is Dr. Aris Thorne. I need to speak with Director Nelson or General Halloway immediately. It's a code red situation. I've been unlawfully removed from United Flight 299 at Dulles." Aris's voice was firm, cutting through the concourse noise. Officers Miller and Kowalski exchanged wide-eyed glances, their posture stiffening. The gate agents were frozen in place, their faces pale. There was a brief pause on the other end, a moment of high-level processing. "Dr. Thorne, stand by for Director Nelson." Another click, and then a deeper, more authoritative voice. "Aris, what in God's name is happening? My secure line just lit up like a Christmas tree." "Director Nelson," Aris said, her voice now filled with a controlled urgency. "I am at Gate C14 at Dulles, Flight 299 to Houston. The lead flight attendant, Brenda Vance, and Captain Richard Sterling deemed me unruly and had me removed. They accused me of being a security threat because I was working on my laptop until the door closed, and I corrected the flight attendant on the aircraft's bulkhead configuration. My laptop contains the latest Artemis guidance code. I was en route to Johnson Space Center for the 1900H meeting. The launch window is closing, and the variance needs my physical intervention." A heavy silence followed. Aris could almost hear the director's mind racing, calculating the implications. They what? Do they have any idea who you are? Apparently not, sir, Eris replied dryly, gesturing to her ID. I showed them my clearance, but they were more interested in getting me off the plane. The plane is currently pushing back from the gate. Don't you move, Eris, Director Nelson's voice thundered, even through the phone. Do not move, and tell those officers to stand down. I'm initiating a full federal response. You stay right there. He hung up. Aris lowered the phone, looking at the stunned officers. He said, "Stand down, and don't move." Officer Miller was already pulling out his radio, his face a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Dispatch, this is Unit 719. I need an urgent patch to airport operations and the control tower. United Flight 299, inbound to Houston, currently pushing back from Gate C14. We have a situation involving a federal asset. Priority Alpha 1. Repeat, Alpha 1. The gate agent, a young man named David, looked like he might faint. A federal asset? What does that mean? Aris simply raised her badge again. The red border, the NASA seal, the top priority. It seemed to glow under the concourse lights. Within minutes, the concourse erupted. The airport manager, a harried woman named Ms. Jenkins, arrived, followed closely by a phalanx of suited men and women, flashing FBI and Homeland Security badges. The atmosphere crackled with sudden, intense energy. "Dr. Thorne?" Ms. Jenkins gasped, her eyes wide as she saw the badge. "What in God's name has happened?" "I was removed from Flight 299 for being unruly," Aris stated calmly, pointing in the direction of the now reversing aircraft. "My mission-critical work was interrupted, and I was subjected to public humiliation based on what I can only assume was racial profiling and a significant lack of judgment from the flight crew." One of the FBI agents, a stern-faced woman named Agent Davies, stepped forward. "Dr. Thorne, we understand you're operating under extreme pressure. Can you confirm the nature of the information on your laptop and the urgency of your travel?" The Artemis 3 guidance system is showing an unexpected orbital variance in its primary trajectory. If I don't implement a patch at Johnson Space Center within the next 2 hours, the entire launch schedule for the next quarter will be delayed, impacting multiple international partners and billions in taxpayer dollars, Aris explained, her scientific precision evident even in her anger. Every minute that plane is moving away from this gate is a minute closer to catastrophic failure for the mission. Agent Davies immediately turned to Ms. Jenkins. "Get that plane back to the gate now. I don't care what it takes. Ground movements, tower, fuel truck, get it done. This is a matter of national security." Ms. Jenkins nodded frantically, already barking orders into her radio. Meanwhile, Aris received another call. This time it was General Holloway. "Dr. Thorne, are you secure?" "Yes, General. Surrounded by federal agents and airport management." "Good. Listen, Director Nelson has already informed the Secretary of Defense. They are livid." "Livid, Oris. We've got a backup team, scrambling a military jet to Houston as a contingency, but you are the primary. Your expertise is irreplaceable. We need you on that flight. Are you able to reboard?" Aris looked towards the plane, which had now stopped its pushback. "I will reboard, General, but not without assurances. This crew needs to understand the gravity of their actions." "Understood," General Holloway said, a grim note in his voice. "Consider it handled. A full investigation will be launched immediately. Anyone involved will face the consequences." As she hung up, a flurry of activity surrounded the plane. Ground crew personnel, previously waving the plane back, were now waving it forward. The jet bridge, which had been retracted, began to extend again. The passengers on Flight 299, who thought they were finally on their way, were now looking out their windows in confusion as their aircraft returned to the gate. The pilot, Captain Sterling, must have been getting an earful from the tower. His booming voice echoed over the intercom just moments later. Folks, apologies for the delay. We've had a slight change in flight operations. We'll be returning to the gate momentarily. We appreciate your patience." His voice, usually so confident, now held a distinct tremor. Karma, Aris thought, was already starting its descent. The jet bridge reconnected to the aircraft with a soft thud. Agent Davies, Ms. Jenkins, Officer Miller, and 2 other FBI agents flanked Aris as she walked back down the now familiar path. The mood was palpably different. The casual murmur of boarding passengers was replaced by an almost total silence. Passengers craned their necks, whispering, trying to understand why their flight was being held, and why that woman was being escorted back on the plane by federal agents. Brenda Vance stood at the cabin door, her face still radiating annoyance, but now tinged with confusion. Captain Sterling peered out from the cockpit doorway, his expression a mixture of irritation and bewilderment. He had just received a furious, non-negotiable directive from Air Traffic Control. United 299, cease pushback, return to gate, federal directive, priority Delta Niner. He'd never heard a priority code like that, as Aris, followed by her federal entourage, stepped back into the first-class cabin. Brenda Vance's eyes narrowed. "What is this? She was removed. You can't just put her back on the flight," she protested to Agent Davies, her voice still carrying its usual sharp edge. Agent Davies, however, was not a passenger she could intimidate. She moved swiftly, placing herself between Brenda and Aris. "Brenda Vance, lead flight attendant. Correct?" "Yes, and I'm telling you, this passenger is a safety risk," Brenda insisted, pointing at Aris. Agent Davies ignored her. She held up her FBI badge, not flashing it quickly, but holding it steady and clear for Brenda to see. "I am Agent Davies, Federal Bureau of Investigation. And this is Dr. Aris Thorne. She is a critical federal asset. Your actions today, Ms. Vance, have constituted interference with a federal mission, a disruption of national security operations, and a potential breach of federal protocols. You have caused a federal aircraft recall. Do you understand the gravity of that?" Brenda's jaw dropped, her face drained of all color. She looked at Aris, then at the badge, then back at Aris. The smug triumph she'd shown earlier dissolved into pure, unadulterated terror. The suspicious codes on the laptop, the aggressive attitude. It all coalesced into a horrifying realization. Captain Sterling, who had moved closer, felt the floor drop out from under him. He recognized the tone in Agent Davies's voice. This wasn't just a passenger complaint. This was an inquisition. "Captain Sterling," Agent Davies continued, turning her gaze to him, "your decision to remove Dr. Thorne, based on unsubstantiated claims of unruly behavior and suspicious work, has placed a vital NASA mission at risk. Your authority as pilot in command is absolute, but it is not without accountability. You will be held personally responsible for the delays and the potential mission impact." "But she was argumentative," Brenda stammered, trying to regain some semblance of control. "She was disrespectful. She challenged my authority." Her disrespect was accurate information about aircraft configuration and adherence to FAA regulations, Aris interjected, her voice calm but cutting. "My argumentativeness was explaining why my federally encrypted equipment couldn't be checked into the cargo hold, and my suspicious codes were literally guiding the next generation of space exploration." The cabin was silent. Every passenger heard it. Mr. Henderson across the aisle looked like he wanted to disappear. The woman who had whispered about terrorist risk was now bright red, sinking deeper into her seat. "Effective immediately," Agent Davies announced, her voice resonating through the cabin. Miss Vance, you are relieved of your duties on this flight. Captain Sterling, you are grounded pending a full investigation. This aircraft will not depart until a new flight crew is on board and has been briefed by myself and airport management regarding the federal implications of this incident. Brenda Vance looked as if she'd been struck. Relieved? Grounded? You can't do that. We can, Agent Davies said, her voice chillingly quiet. And we just did. Officer Miller, please escort Ms. Vance and Captain Sterling off the aircraft. They will be taken to airport security for official statements. Miller, who had been a silent, sweating observer, snapped to attention. Yes, Agent Davies. He approached Brenda, who was now openly weeping, her perfectly pressed uniform rumpled by her shaking. Come on, Brenda, Miller said gently, taking her arm. Brenda looked at Aris, her eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and utter despair. Her career, her reputation, everything she'd built on the foundation of petty authority, was crumbling before her. Captain Sterling, his face pale and crestfallen, slowly unbuckled his seatbelt. He walked past Aris, avoiding her gaze. He had built his entire identity around being captain, the master of his domain. Now that domain had been shattered by a woman in a hoodie he'd dismissed as unruly. As they were escorted off, Agent Davies turned back to the remaining flight attendant, Kelly, who looked terrified, but had remained silent throughout the ordeal. Miss Kelly, you are currently the most senior flight attendant on board. Please reassure the passengers. A new crew is en route. Dr. Thorne needs quiet and an immediate power source for her equipment. Facilitate this. Your cooperation will be noted. Kelly, still trembling slightly, nodded rapidly. Yes, Agent, absolutely. Dr. Thorne, anything you need. Aris walked back to seat 3A. This time, no one questioned her. No one whispered. The federal agents made sure the other passengers understood that any further disruption would have serious consequences. Agent Davies spoke to the now silent cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for this extraordinary delay. The safety and security of all flights are paramount, as is the successful operation of federal initiatives. A new crew will be here shortly, and we will do our best to get you to Houston. Your understanding is appreciated. Aris opened her laptop. She plugged it into the in-seat power outlet. She pulled on her noise-cancelling headphones. Her work was urgent. The Artemis mission was waiting. The variants needed fixing. But as she typed the first line of code, she couldn't help but notice the palpable shift in the air, the hushed awe, the averted gazes, the sudden, profound respect. And somewhere in the terminal, she imagined Brenda and Captain Sterling giving their statements, their authority stripped, their careers potentially in ruins. The karma, Aris realized, wasn't just descending. It had landed, and it was just getting started. The atmosphere aboard Flight 299 had shifted from a tense, hostage situation to something resembling a mobile command center. The replacement crew, led by a Captain Reynolds, had boarded with the solemnity of a funeral procession. Reynolds, a man with 30 years of experience and a deep respect for chain of command, had personally come to seat 3A before they even closed the doors. Dr. Thorne, Reynolds had said, crouching down so he was eye level with her, a gesture of submission and respect that Sterling had been too arrogant to offer. I have been briefed by Agent Davies and Ops Control. We have been cleared for a direct routing to Houston Intercontinental. We will be flying at maximum cruise speed to make up time. If you need anything, coffee, water, silence, a satellite uplink, you tell Kelly, and it happens. We are here to get you to your mission. Thank you, Captain, Aris said, not looking up from her screen. Just get me there. I have 114 minutes before the injection burn window closes. The flight itself was surreal. The cabin, usually a cacophony of clinking glasses and chatting passengers, was dead silent. The passengers in first class, who had previously judged the woman in the hoodie, now watched her with a mixture of fear and awe. They had seen the badge. They had seen the FBI. They realized that while they were flying to business meetings or vacations, the woman in 3A was flying to save something that cost more than this entire airplane. Mr. Henderson, the businessman across the aisle, finally worked up the courage to speak as they reached cruising altitude. "Dr. Thorne?" he whispered. Iris paused, her finger hovering over the enter key. She turned slowly. "Yes?" I wanted to apologize," Henderson said, his face flushing, "for not saying anything earlier. When Brenda was standing over you. We all saw it. We just didn't want to get involved. That was cowardly." Iris looked at him. It was a rare moment of human connection amidst the binary code. "It's easy to be quiet when authority speaks, Mr. Henderson. But sometimes authority is wrong. Just remember that next time someone unruly is being dragged off a plane." Henderson nodded, suitably chastised. "I will." Iris turned back to her work. The simulation was running slower than she liked. The variance in the Artemis satellite's path was drifting by 0.004 degrees every hour. It sounded microscopic, but in orbital mechanics, 0.004 degrees was the difference between a stable lunar orbit and a billion-dollar satellite smashing into the dark side of the moon. She had to rewrite the thruster firing sequence to account for the drift, a task that usually took a team of 10 3-days. She had 2 hours and 1 laptop. She typed furiously. The code flowed from her brain to her fingers, a language she spoke better than English. If trajectory, delta, 0.05, initiate, yaw, correction, theta, 0.002. The flight attendants, Kelly and the new lead, a woman named Sarah, walked on eggshells. They brought her black coffee without her asking. They blocked the aisle when passengers from economy tried to use the forward lavatory, ensuring Iris's concentration wasn't broken by foot traffic. As the plane began its descent into Houston, Captain Reynolds's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, we are beginning our final approach into George Bush Intercontinental. We have been granted priority clearance by ATC. We will be landing on runway 27, and we will be taxiing fast. Please keep your seatbelts fastened. Once we hit the gate, I need everyone to remain seated. Dr. Thorne has priority deplaning." The wheels hit the tarmac with a screech. The reverse thrusters roared. The plane didn't even fully slow down before it was turning off the runway, bypassing other taxiing jets. It was the fastest taxi to the gate in the history of the airport. When the chime sounded, Iris was already standing, bag shouldered, laptop in hand. "Good luck, Doctor," Kelly whispered as she opened the cabin door. Iris stepped onto the jet bridge. It wasn't empty. Waiting for her were 2 men in dark suits and a woman in a NASA flight jacket, Director Collins from Johnson Space Center. Behind them stood 2 airport police officers, blocking the rest of the terminal traffic. "Dr. Thorne!" Collins shouted over the noise of the terminal. "We have a chopper waiting on the tarmac. The motorcade would take too long in this traffic." "Let's go," Iris said, bypassing the pleasantries. They ran. Literally ran. Through the terminal, out a side security door, and down a flight of metal stairs onto the tarmac, where a black helicopter with the NASA logo was spinning its rotors. Iris threw her bag in and climbed aboard. Collins strapped in next to her. "Status!" Iris yelled over the headset as the chopper lifted off, banking hard toward the southeast. "Bad," Collins said, her face grim. The drift increased. The automated correction failed. Mission control is holding the burn, but we lose the window in 45 minutes. If we don't upload your patch manually from the hardened terminal at JSC, we lose the bird. I wrote the patch on the plane, Aris said, tapping her laptop case. It's risky. I had to bypass the safety limiters on the auxiliary thrusters. If we don't do it, the satellite is space junk, Collins said. Do it. The helicopter ride was a blur of city lights and tension. They landed on the helipad at Johnson Space Center with 20 minutes to spare. Aris jumped out, ducking under the rotors, and sprinted toward Building 30, Mission Control. She burst through the double doors, her badge swiping green on the sensors. The room was exactly as she had left it in her mind. Rows of consoles, giant screens displaying orbital paths, and the thick, heavy silence of focused panic. General Holloway was standing at the flight director's console. He looked up, relief washing over his stern face. "She's here. Plug me in," Aris commanded, sliding into the empty seat at the guidance Guido console. A technician handed her a hard line. She connected her laptop. "Initiating handshake," Aris said, her voice steady. "Verifying encryption keys. Access granted. Uploading patch Artemis var-fix v4py." The giant screen showed a progress bar. 10%, 40%, 80%. 10 minutes to window close, the flight dynamics officer called out. "Upload complete," Aris said. "Compiling." The screen flashed red. "Warning, thruster safety override detected." "Override it," General Holloway ordered. "Trust the math." Aris hit enter. "Executing burn sequence in 3, 2, 1. Mark." On the main screen, a telemetry line representing the satellite flickered. The thrusters fired. The line wobbled, dipped, and then, slowly, agonizingly, pulled back into the green corridor. "Stable orbit achieved," the trajectory officer whispered. Then, louder, "Orbit is stable. We are green for lunar injection." The room erupted. Headsets were thrown onto desks. Cheers rang out. General Holloway let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 4 hours. Aris sat back in her chair, the adrenaline crashing out of her system. She took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. "You did it," Director Collins said, putting a hand on her shoulder. "You actually did it." "I did my job," Aris said quietly. "Now, I want to talk about why I was almost prevented from doing it." General Holloway's smile faded. His face hardened into stone. "Don't worry, Aris. The mission is saved. Now, the war begins." Karma in the modern age does not move slowly. It does not wait for the next life. In the case of Flight 299, karma moved at the speed of fiber-optic cables, fueled by the righteous fury of the Internet and the cold, hard steel of the United States government. The fallout began before the sun even rose over Houston. While Dr. Aris Thorne was sleeping off the adrenaline crash of saving the Artemis mission, a 19-year-old student named Leo, who had been sitting in seat 4B, was uploading a video file to TikTok. Leo had started recording the moment Agent Davies boarded the plane. He hadn't captured the initial argument, but he had captured the climax. The video, captioned, "Karen Flight Attendant tries to kick off NASA scientist, gets destroyed by FBI. Yanimos Karma, ours NASA, Yaris United, hit the algorithm like a meteor. By 8 a.m., it had 2 million views. By noon, it had 20 million. The video was a masterclass in humiliation. It showed Brenda Vance's face crumbling from smug superiority to abject terror as Agent Davies flashed her badge. It showed the hushed silence of the cabin. It showed Captain Sterling looking small and defeated. But most importantly, it showed Oris, calm, collected, and undeniably powerful, plugging in her laptop to save the day. The Internet detectives went to work immediately. Within hours, Brenda Vance's name was trending. The hashtag #LetherCode replaced the day's political news. A Reddit thread dissected the interaction frame by frame, bringing in aviation lawyers to explain exactly how many federal laws Brenda had likely broken. Memes began to circulate, side-by-side images of Ares working on orbital mechanics and Brenda pointing a finger, labeled intelligence versus entitlement. But the digital shaming was merely the appetizer. The main course was served 3 days later in a soundproof conference room at the FAA regional headquarters in Washington, D.C. This was not a standard HR meeting. This was a tribunal. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Director Nelson of NASA and a representative from the Department of Transportation. On the right side sat Ares, looking rested and sharp in a blazer over a t-shirt, flanked by General Holloway and a team of Department of Defense lawyers who looked like they ate nails for breakfast. On the left side sat the airline's terrified legal team, the CEO, Jonathan Price, and the two people who wished they could vanish into the floor, Brenda Vance and Captain Richard Sterling. Brenda looked like a shadow of her former self. Her uniform was gone, replaced by a drab cardigan. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She refused to look across the table. Captain Sterling, stripped of his epaulets, stared at his hands, his knuckles white. "Let's skip the pleasantries," General Holloway rumbled, opening a thick file folder. This incident endangered a $4.2 billion asset and a launch window that has been planned for 3 years. We are here to determine if this was a training failure or a personnel failure. It was a misunderstanding, the airline's lead counsel interjected smoothly. Ms. Vance felt there was a safety issue. She acted out of an abundance of caution. "We apologize for the inconvenience to Dr. Thorne, and we are prepared to offer a settlement of—" "Counselor," Holloway cut him off, his voice low and dangerous. "If you finish that sentence with a dollar amount, I will have you removed for attempting to bribe a federal official. We don't want your money. We want accountability." Holloway nodded to an aide, who pressed a button on a laptop. The room's speakers crackled to life. It was the audio from the cockpit voice recorder, CVR, and the cabin area microphone. The room went deathly silent as the recording played. Brenda's voice, shrill, "I don't need a lesson on my aircraft, ma'am. I need you to comply. It didn't look like work to me." Aris's voice, calm, measured. "It's Python. It's a programming language. I am sitting here, seatbelt on, device off." Sterling's voice, arrogant. "If you give them attitude, you are giving me attitude. Get her off my jetway." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a diamond. General Holloway leaned forward, staring directly at Brenda. "Ms. Vance, in the recording, you stated that Dr. Thorne's coding looked suspicious. We have reviewed your personnel file. Do you have a degree in computer science, cryptography, software engineering?" "No, sir," Brenda whispered, her voice barely audible. "Then on what basis did you determine the text on her screen was a threat?" Holloway pressed. "Was it the syntax, the variables, or was it the person typing it?" Brenda opened her mouth, then closed it. She began to cry. She was wearing a hoodie. She didn't look like a first-class passenger. I thought she was someone who sneaked into the seat." "So bias," Holloway said, leaning back. "Pure, unadulterated bias. You saw a young woman of color in a hoodie, and you decided she didn't belong. And because of that prejudice, you almost torched a NASA mission." He turned his gaze to Captain Sterling. "And you, Captain, the god of the sky. You didn't even come out of the cockpit to assess the situation until the decision was already made. You took the word of your lead attendant over the visual evidence of a compliant passenger. You abandoned your duty to be impartial. I have 30 years of flying experience," Sterling said, his voice cracking. "I have a perfect safety record." "You had a perfect safety record," Director Nelson corrected him, "until you let your ego fly the plane." The punishment was swift, severe, and public. The FAA representative cleared his throat and read from a prepared document. Effective immediately, the Federal Aviation Administration is revoking the Airman Certificate of Captain Richard Sterling for gross negligence and failure to command. You are permanently grounded from commercial aviation. Sterling slumped in his chair, his face turning a sickly shade of grey. His pension, tied to his active status and good standing upon retirement, was effectively incinerated. 30 years of service ended in disgrace because he couldn't be bothered to listen. Then the representative turned to Brenda. "Ms. Vance, your actions constitute a violation of 49 U.S. Code, Paragraph 6504, interference with flight crew members and attendants. Ironically, a law designed to protect you, which you weaponized against a passenger. Furthermore, due to the interference with a federal operation, you are being placed on the Department of Homeland Security's inadmissible persons list for employment in secure transportation sectors." Brenda gasped. "What does that mean?" "It means," Agent Davies said from the back of the room, speaking for the first time, "that you will never work for an airline, a train line, or airport security ever again. You aren't just fired, Miss Vance. You are blacklisted from the industry." The airline CEO, desperate to save his stock price, fired both of them on the spot, effective immediately, with no severance. He also announced a donation of $5 million to STEM programs for underprivileged girls, a desperate attempt to buy back public goodwill, but the karma didn't stop in that room. It followed them home. 2 weeks later, Brenda Vance walked into her local grocery store in suburban Virginia. She wore sunglasses and a hat, trying to be invisible. She reached for a carton of milk. "Hey," a voice said behind her. "Aren't you the unruly lady?" Brenda froze. She turned to see a teenager holding up his phone, recording her. "Leave me alone," she snapped, the old aggression flaring up. "Whoa, watch out, she's going to ground us." The kid laughed. Brenda abandoned her cart and ran out of the store. She realized then that her anonymity was gone. She wasn't Brenda Vance anymore. She was a meme. She was a cautionary tale. She would eventually have to move to a different state, change her name, and take a job answering phones in a windowless call center, a far cry from the power she once wielded at 30,000 feet. As for Iris Thorne, her trajectory was soaring in the opposite direction. A month after the incident, Iris stood backstage at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. The air smelled of expensive perfume and old velvet. The annual Heroes of Innovation Gala was the hottest ticket in town. "You ready?" General Holloway asked, adjusting his dress uniform. Iris looked in the mirror. She had debated what to wear for days. The stylists had sent over gowns, silks, satins, sequins, but none of them felt right. She zipped up the zipper. "I'm ready," she said. She walked out onto the stage. The spotlight hit her, blinding and hot. The audience, filled with senators, astronauts, tech moguls, and military brass, rose to their feet. The applause was a physical wave, crashing over her. Iris walked to the podium wearing black dress slacks, combat boots, and a brand-new crisp grey hoodie. On the chest of the hoodie, embroidered in gold thread, was the NASA meatball logo. The crowd went wild. General Holloway stepped up to the microphone. "Tonight, we honor someone who reminds us that true power isn't about loud voices or shiny badges. It's about competence. It's about grace under fire. And it's about the work." He turned to Iris. "For exceptional service to the Artemis program, and for demonstrating that the smartest person in the room is often the quietest, I present Dr. Iris Thorne with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He placed the heavy ribbon around her neck. The medal rested against the cotton of her hoodie. Aris leaned into the microphone. The room hushed. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady. "I didn't do anything special. I just did my job. But I want to dedicate this award to every engineer, every scientist, and every dreamer who has ever been told they don't look the part, who has been told they are too loud or too quiet or too different." She paused, looking directly into the camera, knowing that somewhere in a small apartment, Brenda Vance might be watching. "There is no look for intelligence," Aris said. "There is only the code you write, the problems you solve, and the height you can reach. So, to anyone trying to keep you down, let them try. Gravity is just a suggestion. And karma? Karma is a law of physics." She walked off the stage to a standing ovation that lasted 5 minutes. Later that night, Aris sat on the balcony of her hotel room overlooking the Potomac River. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from the airline. Subject: Platinum status for life. "Dear Dr. Thorne, as a token of our continued apology, we have upgraded your status to global services for life. Additionally, we have permanently retired the flight number 299. We hope you will fly with us again." Aris smiled. She took a sip of her sparkling water. She opened her laptop. There was a new project file waiting for her. The Mars ascent vehicle needed a new guidance algorithm. She cracked her knuckles. She typed, "Import karma as KK." She hit enter. The screen glowed. The work continued. And somewhere above her, the moon shone a little brighter, safe in its orbit, watched over by the woman in the grey hoodie who refused to be moved. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the story of how Dr. Aris Thorne turned a moment of disrespect into a legendary victory. Brenda Vance and Captain Sterling learned a brutal lesson that day. You can steal someone's time, and you can try to steal their dignity, but you can never steal their genius. They judged a book by its cover, and that book ended up throwing the book at them. Aris didn't just win a legal battle, she forced an entire industry to look in the mirror. She proved that authority without humility is just bullying, and that the most powerful pass in the world isn't a boarding pass, it's competence. I want to know what you think. Was the punishment for the crew enough? Should the airline have paid more? And have you ever been judged by someone who had no idea who you really were? Tell me your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold at 30,000 feet, please destroy that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We have more stories of incredible people fighting back coming soon. Until next time, keep your head up, keep grinding, and never let anyone tell you that you don't belong. Peace.